welcome to episode 37 of Beating BDD, the Body Dysmorphic Disorder podcast from the BDD Foundation. I'm your host, Claire Atherton, and my guest for this episode is Mark Brown, who lived with the disorder for 30 years. For much of that time, Mark looked as if he was functioning from the outside, but inside he was living under what he calls a dome of shame and disgust. Now, after lots of hard work and therapy, he says he's much more present in his life, and his old life with BDD feels like a distant memory. As Mark paints such a clear picture of what it's like living with the disorder, some listeners might find parts of his story upsetting. But the lessons he's learned and the wisdom he shares make it worth staying with us. As ever, this podcast is funded as a result of the Big Give campaign. Thank you to our champion sponsor Jack, or Just Ask a Question, and our community sponsors Ori UK, the Nightingale Hospital and Blonde's Fine Art. You'll find more information on our sponsors in our show notes. Over to Mark. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us on Beating BDD. It's lovely to have you with us.
No problem. It's lovely to be here.
So, as usual, we had a bit of a pre-recording chat just so I could get to know you a little bit, understand a bit more about your story. And I remember you saying that when your BDD was bad, when you used to be in a room full of people, you felt that you just weren't present because your brain was so full of BDD thoughts and you were being really tortured by these thoughts. Today, if you were to find yourself in a room full of people, where do you think your focus would be?
Well, that's a really good question. I think these days my focus is, and my therapist likes to do this with me, rating percentages on focuses. So are you 10% on your, BDD part, or, what's the rating in relation to what the person's saying? And I think these days it hovers up probably around 90%, 80%, depending on the day. But certainly back when BDD was really bad, it would be less than 10, probably less than 5. And it kind of made just actually communicating with the world really quite difficult.
Mm. How do you think that changes your daily life then, now that you're that much more present than you were?
I think it just puts you into life. You feel like you're in the flow of life and an actual actor in it, rather than just behind this screen of BDD. This is like kind of dome of shame and disgust that hangs over you with BDD. I can remember vividly after listening to some stuff from the BDD Foundation, and Rob Wilson was talking about using a clicker to count your thoughts. And I never actually, I actually did get clickers. I never really used them, but I probably should have done. But I tried a number of times to count my BDD thoughts, and it was really difficult to count them because they were just so frequent. It was just basically one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it's not like just sitting pondering about what you might have for lunch. Those thoughts also come with enormous feelings of shame and disgust and self-loathing. So you're very much in this cinema on your own, and the cinema's got the worst film you can imagine that's sparking off all this shame and disgust, and it's playing these images and thoughts, just film after film after film. That's maybe an analogy that maybe comes close. It's a very difficult thing, BDD, to describe to somebody who doesn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to a friend the other day who was mentioning a bit about rumination due to a difficulty they'd gone through.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of sitting on the bed and being a bit frustrated about ruminating about a topic. And I was trying to sort of get them, we were talking about BDD, and I was saying, well, it's like that, except the topic is this body part, and you just feel constant shame and self-loathing, and then just do that for like 30 years.
Rinse and repeat. Yeah.
Rinse and repeat. Yeah. Day to day, up in the morning, last stop before you go to sleep, first thought when you get up in the morning. And it very much was like that. I was actually thinking, trying to go back to that place a little bit before this podcast, because I guess I've probably done such a good job of getting out of that place that it is quite hard to actually put my head back into how that felt. It almost seems like such a long distant memory. But going back there, I can distinctly remember like going to bed at night and just thinking about my nose and whether I was going to have a big boil on my nose the next day. The whole constant kind of thinking was around that sort of stuff, and
Mm,
and feeling like it was disgusting and ugly, and thinking, well, maybe it might get better, maybe my skin might get better, maybe my nose might get better, maybe I can get surgery. And like
yeah.
that's your last thoughts as you go to sleep, and then you probably dream about it.
Mm,
And then in the morning you just get up and it's the routine of checking, feeling. First thing you do, be feel my nose, see if I've got any spots, any boils, um, and then just go from there into the mirror. And hours and hours, every minute I could get away from people or tasks or having to do something would be spent just staring in the mirror at my nose, um, in microscopic detail. And I can remember kind of setting mirrors up. Bedroom cupboard doors were a favorite because you can kind of pull two out and get them at opposite angles, and you get in between those two mirrors and you can see your nose from either side and every sort of angle, and just exploring it and just hating it all the time at close range,
mm,
and finding a mark or a spot or a boil, and just like the sense of like disgust and wanting it to go away, and just embarrassment and humiliation. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much what life was like, and I guess all of that's kind of gone now, and really
amazing.
yeah, life's very different. It's hard to think back to what that was like, actually.
Yeah, well, it's a huge thing to be able to say. What an achievement.
Yeah, thank you. It took a lot of
Yeah.
work and a lot of
Yeah.
help, and
Mm,
and very fortunate to get to this point. There's been so much support from my family, friends, um, my therapist, Catherine, has just been amazing, and the foundation as well, the resources and what it does. They've been just a godsend to
mm,
help get me to this point, and it hasn't been quick or easy. It's taken quite a number of years,
mm.
but yeah, life is so much better than it was.
That's great to hear. So you mentioned just then about having had BDD for 30 years. So when do you think it first came on, and what, if any, do you think, if you could remember, what triggers might have been for that?
Yeah, so like anything, there's not one defined moment. It was a bit of a process. If I think back through time, I think quite early, certainly in primary school, I can remember feeling very self-conscious about my nose, actually, and also my appearance. I had several slightly strange preoccupations, the first of which was licking my lips and them having to look shiny, I remember. And this must have been at the age of about 7, something
Mm,
like that. And that progressed on to then my nose and having to like tense my nose to sort of make it look thinner. So
mm,
like having this tensed expression on my face. I can remember that doing that in primary school, but I
mm,
wouldn't have said that that was really BDD at that point.
mm,
But there's definitely some preoccupation with appearance building then. Probably when BDD kicked in fully was when I got acne on my nose in senior school early, probably transtus first year, which was early teens, hormones raging, and started to get kind of spots and acne, which seemed to just be
mm,
mainly, to me anyway, focused on my nose. Might not have been the case, but that's where my preoccupation went. And I remember first I had these. I can still remember them because I can remember a lot of the spots and boils I had on my nose. It's weird, and different areas and bumps, and like I used to have like a road map of it all in my head that I've now
mm.
kind of forgotten. Like some sort of weird nose London taxi driver. Um, and I mean that's how good my knowledge was of every pore and every bump and every
Yeah.
red mark and every you know bit that I didn't like and every pool of oil that I would see at close range. But that kind of came in senior school. And yeah, when that actually came, there was, yeah, a bit of bullying and teasing and unkind comments and humiliating things said. You know, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was one that was leveled at me a few times. And yeah, when you're already feeling self-conscious and self-aware and BDD is already coming up, perhaps for other people, those kind of comments, they might have just rolled off their shoulder. But I think probably there's a fair genetic propensity towards BDD. And so when that happened at that time in life, yeah, it really just helped to get its claws in.
Yeah, it's all the sort of factors being in place, isn't it? All the elements being in place and all sort of getting switched on through, something gets switched on basically through experience, can't it?
Yeah, I think it was there already, in the background, and just teenage years and circumstances.
Yeah. When then did the sort of BDD behaviours start, starting to look in the mirror or avoid mirrors and things like that?
So it was around that time. I think it began with mirror checking and just spending long amounts of time in the mirror. I remember, and this is quite like difficult to, not difficult, I find it okay to talk about now, but it used to be very difficult to talk about. And I probably never got into this level of detail about it before, but yeah, maybe it helps others, I don't know. But yeah, there was definitely like just obsessions of squeezing spots on my nose, any spot that I got, and boils, and like trying to get rid of them by doing that. But really I was probably making the acne that I had worse. And so it was this self-feeding loop. And then yeah, just feeling disgusting and revolting and seeing all these red marks and scars. And yeah, it was just a total obsession that began then. And then it flowed into other things. So a lot of it was around trying to make it better and camouflage it. So showers, like, showering several times a day, thinking that would clean my nose and then I wouldn't get spots. But probably I was just drying out my skin and making the acne I had a bit worse. Oxy pads, which again probably made my nose look redder and sorer. And needles and pins, trying to, if I had boils and spots, burst them with needles and pins, and probably leaving sore marks in my face and making it much worse. But I just couldn't get away from it. I was just so preoccupied with it. And then really just every time, constantly monitoring, thinking, am I going to have a spot, a boil? Is this going to be a small one? Is it going to be a massive boil? And just shame from that. And then I guess that then turned into, probably I didn't realize at the time, but avoidance. So avoiding some social situations, avoiding people I maybe didn't feel comfortable with. I think as much as I did do some avoidance, I generally kind of functioned and pushed myself a lot because I had this probably quite strong inner critic that was telling me like I had to do things, I had to appear normal, I had to perform. And so it wouldn't let me even be kind of kind to myself. It was just kind of pushing me. And so there was a huge amount of anxiety in social situations and parties. And I had a really great group of friends. And funnily, I was actually quite, I think, reasonably popular at school and knew a lot of people, but a lot of it seemed like a very big performance to me. And I think that's a word that probably characterizes a lot of my life, like performance rather than presence, because I was always there in my head torturing myself, but on the outside performing this role of happy Mark, or trying to, while feeling completely miserable on the inside. And I think that's one of the strange paradoxes of BDD is sometimes, and I guess mental health in general, often you can appear to be functioning in life, but really inside it's a very different story.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think if I were to ask any of your school friends what you'd been like at that time, would any of them have had any idea? what was really going on for you, or anyone in your family?
No, I don't think anyone did. And I think if you ask my school friends, which I kind of have myself, they would probably say, well, you seemed fine, you seemed quite outgoing and contented, and in lots of ways I was doing well. I was good at sports at school. I went to quite a high performing school. So my grades weren't the top of the class, but they were good grades. And yeah, in many ways I was having success at school. There were girls that, I kissed, and it wasn't like outwardly anything would have appeared really wrong, but inwardly, yeah, I was kind of tortured and life just was miserable.
Yeah. What happened then next? I mean, did you stay on at school? So was your schoolwork unaffected and you were able to study and go to uni and things like that?
So I'm dyslexic, which runs in my kind of dad's side of the family, and mine fortunately hasn't been too bad, and I got a lot of help in junior school from that, and it seemed to kind of almost, I wouldn't say go away, but it affected me with maths, but with English and with words and with information, I was always really good. And so I think with school, I could have done a lot better had I been able to study, but I would procrastinate a lot, and obviously BDD would get in the way. And yeah, I couldn't really study without the absolute pressure of the exam looming. And then I would kind of hyperfixate. As you know, I mentioned in the build up, like recently I'd been diagnosed with ADHD. And I think that's something that maybe runs a little bit in my mum's side of the family. And yeah, so I could hyperfixate and I could remember information. So that kind of got me through. I would just study before exams for maybe a week or so, and that was enough to get me pretty decent grades. But I think now, later in life, being much better with my BDD, being much more relaxed. And it's still a journey actually at the minute, but I'm learning to kind of do things bit by bit. And I think had I been able to do that back then and apply myself in a more gentle, compassionate way over time, I think I could have done a lot better. So yeah, I was lucky, and I came out of school with pretty good exam results and went to go off to university. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I mean, really all I wanted to do was not feel the way that I felt. And I actually remember thinking, well, maybe if I did psychology, I might be able to figure out a way to work out why I'm feeling like this and why I'm so unhappy. As part of it, I was also interested a bit in psychology too. So I didn't really have anything better that I thought I could be doing. So I went into doing that. And like in the beginning of uni, I was at a uni near to where I lived in Scotland, and it didn't really work out. I wasn't meeting anybody. I had no self-confidence to go up and start a conversation with anybody. And so, yeah, I didn't meet anybody. The uni I was at was close to home, so I was still living at home. So I wasn't living in halls, didn't meet anyone. And so I gave that up, and I ended up just working for a year, had a year out. And then went back to university the year after that and went further up north of Scotland where some friends were. And yeah, bit more successful up there, but I really just relied on the friends that I had from school up there. I wasn't really good at kind of making new friends, I don't think. Just BDD was just always kind of, new people were quite a dangerous prospect. I think you're always kind of waiting for somebody to say something to call you out on your body part. So you kind of seek out those who you know and you feel comfortable with. I'd been at that school my whole life, so my best friends there were kind of like almost brothers to me. So you feel very comfortable, and I've kept those friends all the way through life. I've been very lucky in that respect.
So while you were at uni, and your BTD was kind of limiting you socially, I guess, do you feel looking back that it had got worse from how it was at school, or do you think it had already reached a pretty painful level and just maintained that level? I mean, were you conscious of it getting worse and your behaviours getting more, it taking up more of your headspace, more of your time?
I think the latter. I think it pretty much stayed the same. It got so bad at school, I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe it can always get worse, but like that song, things can only get better. But
Mm.
but yeah, I think it got about as bad as it could get. And it just stayed that way through uni. It probably changed, like context and situation always changes anything. So
Mm.
how I was doing it probably changed. I was probably, yeah, probably a bit more time spent in mirrors, I think, when I was in school, just
Mm.
being at home. I think I was out and about a bit more. By that time I could drive and had a car, so that that took you out and about with friends, so it kind of got you out of the house a little bit. When I was a kid, like all kids, if your pal wasn't in down the road, then you were in the house. Um,
Mm.
and school, when, yeah, I think pretty much the same really through that period.
Mm. And what happened with romantic relationships? I mean, did you have girlfriends, or was that just out of the question because of the BDD?
No, no, I had girlfriends, and I always, probably, if I'm brutally honest, like sought validation in having
Mm-hmm.
girlfriends. It felt nice that someone liked you, but
Mm.
it also affected relationships, and that I think I wasn't easy to be with. I'll be brutally honest, um, because of the BDD. And so, yeah, I'm sure it's had a big effect. I know it has on long-term relationships I've had in my life.
Mm.
Um, and I've had periods where I've chosen to be single for long periods to sort of try and help with BDD and just take that element out of life. I think relationships are difficult, can be difficult things in some ways. You've got to balance emotions with somebody, wants, compromise. You've got
Mm.
to try and help somebody else regulate their own emotions. And if you're completely unregulated with BDD and you're in this maelstrom of shame and self-loathing, that can be difficult. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, especially if it's maybe not out in the open as it wasn't in early relationships.
Yeah.
So I think that probably had a big effect on them.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. It sounds as if you realised quite early that you had BDD.
Hmm.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was thinking about that earlier. I think it's tricky. I remember coming to the end of school and just being miserable and feeling disgusting and ugly and going off to university and doing psychology. And I think it was probably during my psychology course. I
Mm.
think I must have come across something. I think I have this memory of a magazine article
Mm.
and then bits of what I was doing in psychology when I was actually there and studying, because most of the time I wasn't actually in lectures, I was probably drinking. And,
Yeah.
yeah, and pursuing other pursuits.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think around about then I realized what BDD was, and I started to put two and two together
Yeah.
a little bit. And it's funny because you can know something psychologically from a logical perspective, but just feel completely
Mhm.
different. And
Yeah.
that's the story of BDD. So I think I probably had, I would call it psychological insight quite early, but really emotional insight. Yeah, that took years and years and years to change within me.
Yeah. Did you ever get officially diagnosed?
Kind of. It's a funny one as well because, going to support groups and stuff, and now being much better, I talk to people about, and people often talk about diagnosis, and I can see that there's an understandable desire for people to get diagnosed with
Mhm.
BDD, and I think people maybe think, well, when I get diagnosed, I'll be okay because then I'll know I'm not, and I'll just be able to go, okay, that was a silly thing. Someone's told me I am, and
Mhm.
the reality isn't like that. It's the condition is not question one way or another. It's a whole set of habits and preoccupations and a pattern in your brain, really, that you're patterning. So a little bit of information from somebody saying, you've got BDD, it doesn't change that pattern. So for me, the thing that was important in helping me understand, and that I still look back to, is reading Rob Wilson and David Thiel's book, Overcoming Body Image Problems and Body Dysmorphia.
Yeah.
And going through that, it was so crazy because it was just a description of everything that I did, down to the absolute minute detail, camouflaging, avoiding, comparing, safety-seeking behaviors, avoidance, like every single thing in that book, it could have been writing about me. And
Mm.
so, just from a logical point of view, I think I'm probably a reasonably logical person, I think, but I was just like, what are the mathematical chances of somebody writing out exactly what I do? Like, it's beyond a mathematical, it'd be like winning the national lottery 16 times in a row. It's just
Yeah.
not possible. So I think the penny dropped then that, okay, this is definitely a psychological problem and not a physical problem. But I still felt like it was a physical problem. I still lived the physical problem for years and years and years afterwards,
Mm.
but knowing logically that it wasn't. And that's the strange thing about it. I think much later, and when I was trying to get a good therapist, because that's maybe something that's worth talking about, and
Mm.
I managed to get an appointment with Dr. Veal, although I don't think he really does therapy. I think I just kind of forced myself on him really through his secretary, who and just didn't really take no for an answer. And then the same thing with Rob Wilson. I had one session with each of them, and it was very much just like explaining where I was in my journey and where I was getting to with recovery myself, because I didn't really have a therapist at that point. And I think Dr. Veal had said to me, yeah, you've got BDD. But it
Mm.
wasn't like an official letter. I don't have it up on my wall beside
Yes.
the
In the
university.
downstairs toilet. No.
Yeah, no, it's not there. Although maybe I should. I don't know. But yeah, so I kind of
Mm.
did get an official diagnosis, but I guess point being is I'm not that sure that they're
Mm.
needed. Um,
Yeah. No, not necessarily at all. And certainly it sounds like, I mean, you had the book and you were starting to work through the book, and it sounds as if you were starting to almost apply what was in the book on your own, weren't you? But
yeah,
how did that work out though? Did you find did that come easily? Were there challenges along the way doing it that way?
a huge amount of challenges, and with
Mm.
hindsight, I would have done it very differently. But I think I'd had a therapist when I was about 18. I'd actually, coming out of university doing psychology, I'd wanted to go in and do CBT psychotherapy, and I did about a year of that, and I stopped because I personal reasons, and I moved and things. But really, I wasn't cut out at that point in life at,
Mm.
19, 20 years old to actually do that. But I had a therapist at that time, and they were good therapists. They're quite helpful, but yeah, it didn't really sink in. I don't think I really was ready to actually, at that point, let go of BDD. It
Mm.
was agony, but it was familiar.
Mhm.
And I think that's true of a lot of mental health conditions. They become your normality, and
Yeah.
it's quite scary to actually think about letting that go in a
Yeah.
way. As much as you feel the pain of it, actually letting go and living a different life, because really these conditions are trying to protect you in a way. They're trying to stop bad things happening. Somebody maybe saying something again to me. They're trying to do something helpful, but in a really unhelpful way.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, I had one therapist, then had another therapist as I was starting to think, right, I really need to tackle this. And again, they were on the face of it, a pretty good therapist, and well qualified, worked in the NHS for quite a number of years. And I went in and sat and did some sessions, and like by this time I'd probably read Rob and David's book about
Mhm.
500 times.
Mm.
And was beginning to become a bit of an almanac in all things BDD, as my ADHD kind of does. Like once I get interested in something, I can
Yeah.
hyperfixate, and so I recognized that I wasn't doing anything that was in this book in these therapy sessions, and I was like, what is going on here? Like
Mm.
this doesn't add up. So I stopped that therapist, and then that's when, I was working on the book and what was probably misguided about that approach. But that's when I was like, right, I need to there must be therapists out there that know more about BDD. And that's when I went through David and Rob, and then eventually they sort of recommended someone, I think probably that had trained with them, and then they recommended someone that kind of worked with them. So it was quite convoluted, and that's something that is difficult to get good help with BDD, and I think for a lot of people with BDD, that's the tragic reality, is that they don't get to good help, and they maybe get help that isn't ideal for BDD, and that can almost make it worse, because then you feel like, well, I haven't got better, what's the point? So don't give up. I would say just keep being
Mm.
persistent. And certainly with the book, yeah, my character is everything to the extreme, black or white, and there's a very strong drive in me.
Mm.
And that's part of my BDD, but it's also the part of me that wouldn't give up and wouldn't let it beat me. But it's also the part of me that can drive me down negative roads with BDD. So ERP was quite extreme. I remember realizing I was going to have to do all the things and give up all the things that I felt were keeping me safe. And that's a terrifying thought. And I threw
Mm.
myself into that probably far too hard, and did some crazy things quickly that were probably too far for my BDD, and probably made myself lapse a lot of times backward that I didn't need to, by doing extreme sort of exposures without help and guidance and support of a therapist to kind of slow me down and get me to be more compassionate and thoughtful. And so, yeah, it was quite an extreme form of getting better from BDD. And yeah, with hindsight, a therapist would have been really, really helpful in that process.
Are you able to give an example, just because not everyone listening probably would know necessarily what the ERP stands for, or what those exercises look like? So it might be helpful just to maybe give an example of something that you did where you feel you maybe pushed yourself too hard.
So ERP stands for Exposure Response Prevention, I
Mm-hmm.
believe,
Yeah.
which I actually don't like that term. I was saying this to someone the other day. I actually think exposure response acceptance would be a better term, because really you're triggering off your BDD by doing something like exposing yourself in a way. So maybe removing a camouflaging behavior.
Mm.
For me, a huge one was I used to wear these creams on my nose that were kind of like acne creams with
Mm-hmm.
acne tretinoins and different things in them. And I eventually got the strongest one, and that was like my major safety blanket. And a huge exposure for me was stopping doing that. And the first day that I didn't wear that. So that's going to make you anxious. And really, what you're trying to do is just repeat that and continue on about your normal life
Yeah.
while feeling the anxiety. And the anxiety should build and build, and then eventually kind of reduce.
Mhm.
And by doing that repeatedly, you kind of condition yourself. I guess it's similar to the process of people getting over phobias in some basic ways. But then the bit I don't like about the prevention is it's actually, you're not trying to prevent the response. You're allowing the response, because what happens in your head is all these thoughts of BDD, all these anxious thoughts. And actually, I think now, from a much more compassionate place in my life, like, it's just observing all that noise and
Mm.
allowing it to be there, and realizing it's trying to help you, but it's
Mm.
not. And then just gently trying to guide your attention back to the present moment and what's going on around you, the conversation you're in. And so
Mm.
that's why I like acceptance rather than prevention, because prevention's a bit like, oh, I'm going to just focus on the conversation, and it's almost being rough with yourself.
Mm.
And that doesn't work. It's a line from a Buddhist meditation guy that I like, Yongey Rinpoche, and that's what he uses. And it's the same mechanism in the brain. If you try to stop thinking of your BDD thoughts when you're in exposure by forcing it, they'll just come on stronger. You just
Mm.
got to kind of accept they're there, and they're trying to do something helpful, and just try, if you can, to keep just gently guiding your attention back. So that's not how I approached it during my ERP experiments. I would very much do the wrong thing, and probably not do things in a graded way and rush through things. I'd written out a list from small things like reducing mirror checking, which is a form of exposure because, that's in a way almost trying to make yourself feel more comfortable, to going out into social situations, to contamination fears around my nose, so touching my nose. I wouldn't let anyone touch my nose and wouldn't touch my own nose. So beginning to touch my nose, just up through the chain to like, I'd written some of the most extreme ones, which were like touching something really dirty, like the inside of a toilet, and then touching my nose. I remember doing that, which seems crazy. And it probably is quite crazy and probably not necessary. And probably if I'd had a therapist, that would never have happened. But in my head, in my uber driven ADHD focused head, I was like, right, I'm just going to do all these things as quickly and as fast as possible because I want to be over this. And really a lot of times I was probably knocking myself back and probably doing a lot of it out of that drive system, which is part of my ADHD, and not really out of a compassion system, which is kind of taken me many years of ignoring my therapist about compassion to eventually get to the point where I realized how important that is.
Yeah. So how then did you start to feel better after these attempts to sort of push yourself a little bit too hard?
Yeah. So as much as I was pushing myself too hard, I was doing a lot of stuff right. I was refocusing attention. I was reducing comparing. I was giving up safety behaviors, the cream, the other things I did was, wiping my nose with tissues to dry it, giving up that, washing my nose, stop giving up that. It was very much like I would describe it as starving BDD. So everything that BDD tells you to do, in some ways, getting over BDD it's very complicated, and because it's so tricksy, steal a phrase there from Rufus, but it is so tricky. It co-ops so many things, but under it is quite simple as well, in that like everything that BDD is getting you to do, like stop doing it and kind of do the opposite. And that's very much oversimplifying it because it is really complicated and it sucks you back in so easily. But I was doing all that stuff, all the starvation stuff right. And that was helping, and I was getting there with it. I was having longer periods without really intense, debilitating BDD. But I was also having big crashes and falls. So I'd maybe have a day or two where I'd feel a bit better. And then I would just crash off the other side of that. And in some ways, I think with BDD recovery, it's not linear. It takes a long time to get things moving. Once they're moving, they gather pace, a bit like a snowball. But as you start to get a little bit better and you kind of, your head comes out from under the water of BDD and you see the sun above and you have these glimmers of feeling a little bit, inverted commas, normal. And when you then have a relapse, as you will frequently through recovery, by its nature, you're pushing BDD and challenging it to come back stronger. But when you have a relapse, you almost fall further than you were, where you were just miserable all the time and you were used to it. So yeah, I was going in the right direction, having big relapses, but just trying to get back on the horse. My mum was great during that time. Like, some of it is also just, you feel so depressed and negative when you have a relapse, and like you're never going to get out of it. And it's easy to feel really melancholy and down. And sometimes it's just having someone to say to you, think how well you've done, think how far you've come already, like all the things you pushed yourself through, just a bit of a cheerleader to kind of make you just feel a little glimmer of positivity, to then get you to go back to sort of treating it like theory B rather than theory A.
Yeah. I mean, how do you think you managed to get from this position of having quite a lot of relapses and to where you are today, where you say that you're sort of 80, 90% free of those intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, so just kind of determination really, and help and support. So I got my therapist, Catherine, who's amazing. I credit a huge amount of this to her. Yeah, I wouldn't have gotten there without her. And just getting back on the horse is the way I would describe it, like soldiering on and just don't give up, really. A thing that really used to help me a lot in the early days before Catherine was Rob Wilson did a talk in 2015. It's on YouTube from the BDD conference, and he just kind of, it's a call to action: try again, and it's
Right.
also just a really great summary explanation of everything that's in his book with Dr. Real, and
Mhm.
really that helped so much, because when I was feeling like the BDD had come back and everything felt down, it was a really
Mm.
easy way to just like lie down, relax a bit. Although I didn't realize I was relaxing listening to it, but probably that's what I was doing, was regulating my nervous system, and just
Mm.
listen to Rob talk in a compassionate way, so knowledgeably, and at such a lovely, easy to understand kind of
Mhm.
summary level, and just go, right, okay, yeah, I do that. Remember that. Okay, I do need to do that. And it would just like reset me back onto, okay, I need to just now walk out that door and treat it as if it's a psychological problem, even though everything in me screams there is a real physical problem. I just have to get back onto faking it till I make it. And I know if I just act as if it isn't for a day or two, the the
Mhm.
the feelings, the shame, everything will start to subside, and I'll get back to where I was. And it was just a process of continually doing that, getting back on the horse. And then also just working with Catherine and unpicking different elements of it that I didn't understand. Um, there's other things that play in it, like, a real strong inner critic. There was
Mm.
kind of inner child stuff that I had done
Mhm.
through eye movement work with Catherine, which, looking back at traumatic memories, um, and yeah, a whole raft of things, and just continually practicing more exposure, more ERPs, uh,
Mhm.
doing that on a day-to-day basis. And, attention refocusing was a huge part, learning to, especially for me with ADHD, my brain pings around a lot and I think a lot. It's
Yeah.
far too much. So, yeah, tackling that monster has and still is probably an ongoing life thing for me, just having a busy mind,
Mm.
and learning to be
Yeah.
present and not in the mind and be more in the body. So so many things.
You have mentioned being kind to yourself and self-compassion as well. So what role have
Mm.
those things played?
So that I think that's how I would characterize recovery. Is
Mhm.
stage one is starvation. Well, for me anyway. And probably you want to really do stage one with stage two. But just the way my mind works, I never really got to stage two, the compassion bit, till much later, because
Mm.
there's so much drive and so much thinking and logic in my brain. But for me, stage one was all the starvation. And then, although I'd been doing compassionate work with my therapist for a long time, like, you know, kind of talking with my inner child, the younger, scared version of me, um, compassionate breathing exercises, um, learning to try to take rests and breaks and down-regulate my nervous system, which was always in a state of anxiety. Although I'd done all this through therapy, it didn't really land, because I didn't really feel any compassion for myself ever. There was never any warm feelings to myself. Like, everything in my life was a moral issue towards myself. Like, my BDD was a moral issue. I probably shouldn't have had it in my own head. That's my fault. How could I be selfish for spending all this time? Um,
Mm.
what did that mean for others around me, for my kids, for my family? Why was I not better at things? Why wasn't I more successful in every domain in life? It was all a moral issue, and there was a lot of self-hate and loathing. So compassion was the furthest possible thing for me. I don't think I'd ever felt it for myself. A very grey world, really. So
Mm.
it took a long time for it to land, despite my therapist's best efforts. Um, but when it did land relatively recently, in the last year or two, it's made a huge difference. And I think I first discovered it a bit through listening to some of Paul Gilbert's talks.
Mhm.
Well, because I was doing it with my therapist, but when I would listen to him do a talk, and I bought his book and I read his book, some of it anyway, and it still didn't land. I think really just my BDD had to go down a lot for it to there'd be enough clear space for me to start thinking about it,
Mm.
and to realize. And then also, I think probably without realizing it, the BDD support groups through the foundation that you're involved in, you feel a huge amount of compassion in those because you've got all these other people who going through the same thing as you, and like you can, especially now, I can physically feel the compassion that's in that space for each other. And so, yeah, naturally, it just kind of dawned on me that there is such a thing as self-compassion and self-care and
Mm.
giving yourself a rest and not driving yourself all the time.
Mm.
And then even starting to now do a lot more compassionate exercises, compassionate breathing, visualizations. I've always had a bit of an interest in Buddhism. I think I tried to meditate my way out of BDD when I was about 19, 20. I don't recommend that. I think it just pickled my brain and I just sat there thinking about it all even more.
Mm.
Um,
So when you mention the BDD Foundation support groups, are you then talking about the general support groups or the program that you've been helping to facilitate with
so
the Overcoming BDD program?
both the support groups
Mm.
I've been involved in, and still am a little bit, and now the program that I've
Yeah.
been facilitating. Both of them, it's a similar environment. You know, everyone's there on the call, and everyone's going through the same thing together, and
Mm.
everyone's sharing help and support. And I don't think I've ever been in probably a space where you can feel that much empathy because
Mm.
everyone knows how much everyone else is suffering and has suffered.
Yeah. What would you say you get out of your volunteering as a facilitator? Do you think it helps you stay well? And if so, how does it do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still getting better. I don't know where I still experience BDD from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just a very small measure in my life now. But I think the groups keep it that way because I get to kind of reorientate myself. I get to share experiences of what I've gone through, which reminds me of where I need to be going and what's important, and the sort of the roadmap. And yeah, it's also lovely to feel like you're doing something that might be helping a little bit. And that helps build a bit of self-compassion and self-esteem and self-value as well.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I get a huge amount from the groups and also just from things people say and the journey that they're on. And like I see it's free therapy, to be honest. Some of the things that some people
Mm.
say are awesome. And, you know, they land so well because they're living them, sometimes even better than it might be from my therapist. The tidbits and the takeaways and the reminders. There's one lady in particular on the support groups I go to who just gives such a great summary, and she's been from the absolute depths of, I think, as bad a place you could be with BDD to a really pretty good place. And she's also, I think, got a great therapist, and she often sort of reiterates little key points and takeaways from that. And I soak that up. I'm like, this is hundreds of pounds an hour worth of therapy. Let's do this.
Therapy by proxy. Yeah.
Therapy by
There is
proxy.
there is
Yeah,
so much wisdom in that community, though, isn't there? I think empathy and wisdom are the two words that I always think of when I think about that group of people. It's remarkable, really.
it is so remarkable. It is, and the whole
Yeah.
model of how people who are recovering are helping people who are recovering is could
Mm-hmm.
be applied so widely to so many things. And yeah, it's such an amazing force now
Yeah.
that's now self-perpetuating. And yeah, and the people who are involved in it are awesome. I think, funnily enough, I've said this in a few support groups, people with BDD tend to be, in my experience of all those I met with them, really lovely, humble, compassionate
Mm.
people, just by
Yeah,
virtue of the fact that they've been through so much.
I would agree with that. One final thing I wanted to just ask you was, I mean, I suppose I'm thinking now about somebody, if you imagine talking to somebody with BDD who hasn't got that support network around them just now, isn't in support groups, doesn't maybe have anyone to talk to, what would you say to them to give them some hope for their future from your experiences?
Don't give up.
Mm.
You do deserve to be happy in life. Everyone does.
Mm.
And, none of us are responsible for the brains that we have. They're a product of our genes or upbringings that we don't control. We didn't even ask to get born into this world. You've just been born in, and you've got this brain and this set of genes and experiences that have led you to here, and it's not your fault. And
Mm.
there is a way out of it. And I think the key is you're not going to get out of BDD with what you currently know.
Mm.
Like you can't dig your way out of a hole with the spade and the pick and the shovel that you've already got. You need new information.
Yeah.
I think we all feel sometimes in our world, in our brain, like we should be able to figure it out. But if we haven't already, the chances are we aren't going to until we get some new information in that helps us to figure it out, new perspectives, new ways of thinking, new people around us to help guide us. And so that's where books are amazingly valuable. Get tooled up with information, get BDD books, go on the podcast, go on the videos from the foundation online, start to listen, take it in, and if you can, get a good therapist that can help you and get that new information, and that will help you find a way out of it. And just don't give up on yourself. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. That's been really, really interesting to chat to you. I think you've given us lots and lots of great insights that will help other people. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks so much again to Mark for sharing his experience with such honesty, clarity and humour. For more episodes, search for Beating BTD on major podcast apps and on Spotify. You can also leave us feedback by following the BTD Foundation on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. I'll be back with another interview next month. Until then, remember that this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.